Grandma Rose always said trust was like fine china. Once broken, never the same again. Sheriff Bill Thompson froze mid-step on his front porch, coffee mug slipping from his fingers as his phone buzzed with the emergency dispatch. All units to Copper Ridge High School. We have a code yellow involving student transportation. The porcelain shattered against weathered wood, dark liquid spreading like blood across the planks. Code yellow meant one thing in their small Arizona town, a child predator situation. Bill's stomach lurched as dispatch crackled again. 16-year-old Emma Grace Mitchell reporting inappropriate conduct from bus driver Frank O'Sullivan. Inside the house, Rose's wheelchair squeaked against the hardwood floor. At 75, with cancer eating away at her bones, she shouldn't have been eavesdropping. But her weathered hand clutched the doorframe, knuckles white as winter frost. "Emma Grace," she whispered, her voice carrying 50 years of buried nightmares. "Oh, just like me." The morning sun cast long shadows across Copper Ridge as Bill grabbed his keys, racing toward a truth that would shatter their small town forever. How many other children had Frank O'Sullivan told, "Sit by me or don't go at all"? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Copper Ridge, Arizona stretched across the desert like a faded photograph, its population of 3,200 souls clinging to memories of better days when copper flowed from the mountains and families didn't worry about making ends meet. The abandoned mining equipment scattered across the horizon served as rusted monuments to dreams that died hard in the unforgiving southwest sun. Samuel "Sam" Mitchell wiped grease from his calloused hands as he closed another repair invoice. $38 for a brake job that should have cost twice that. At 42, the lines around his eyes told the story of a man who'd aged a decade in the 3 years since cancer took his wife Margaret. The auto shop barely kept them afloat, especially with Emma Grace's college dreams burning a hole in his heart every time she mentioned USC's film program. "Dad, I got the equipment list," Emma had said just last week, her green eyes bright with hope as she handed him a crumpled paper. $700 for a camera package that might as well have been $7,000. The medical bills from Margaret's fight, $127,000 and counting, made even small dreams feel impossible. Emma Grace. Mitchell possessed her mother's stubborn optimism and her father's gentle heart. At 16, she carried herself with quiet dignity, sketching storyboards during lunch and writing scripts late into the night by lamplight to save on electricity. She'd inherited Margaret's auburn hair and Sam's determination, but the financial weight of their small family pressed heavy on her young shoulders. 3 houses down, Rose Thompson sat by her kitchen window, watching the morning ritual unfold. Her 75-year-old fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, the same cup she'd used for 40 years, because replacing things cost money better spent elsewhere. The cancer treatments had left her frail, but her mind remained sharp as desert thorns. Rose had moved to Copper Ridge 2 years ago, telling neighbors she wanted quiet for her final years. The truth ran deeper, darker, rooted in newspaper clippings she kept hidden in an old shoebox. Sheriff Bill Thompson, Rose's nephew, had worn the badge for 15 years with the kind of steady dedication small towns demanded. At 45, he'd seen enough domestic disputes and petty theft to recognize real evil when it showed its face. His morning routine included checking on Aunt Rose, whose cryptic warnings about trusting too easily had always puzzled him. Frank O'Sullivan had driven bus routes for 8 years, his personnel file clean except for recent financial troubles following his messy divorce. The school board appreciated his reliability, parents trusted him with their most precious cargo, and children knew him as the driver who sometimes slipped them extra time to finish homework during rides. But Rose had been watching Frank O'Sullivan since the day he arrived in Copper Ridge. her weathered hands shaking not from age or illness but from memories of 1973 that refused to stay buried. She'd seen his type before, patient predators who wore masks of kindness while hunting the vulnerable. The October morning started like any other in the Mitchell household. Sam brewing coffee in a pot held together with electrical tape while Emma gathered her film project materials. She'd been working on a documentary about local history for weeks, interviewing elderly residents about Copper Ridge's mining days. The assignment meant everything to her college application portfolio. "Dad," Mr. Henderson said, "if this project wins the state competition, it comes with a $500 scholarship," Emma said, stuffing notebooks into her worn backpack. The excitement in her voice made Sam's chest tighten. $500 was their grocery budget for 2 months. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your mother would be so proud." Emma kissed his cheek and headed for the school bus, her camera equipment bag slung over her shoulder. Sam watched through the kitchen window as she approached the familiar yellow vehicle, Frank O'Sullivan's friendly wave greeting her as always. But something felt different this morning. Frank stepped out of the driver's seat, intercepting Emma before she could board. Their conversation lasted longer than usual, Frank's body language more intense, his hand gesturing toward the front seats. Sam couldn't hear the words, but he saw Emma's shoulders tense, saw her step backward. On the bus, Frank's voice carried a tone Emma had never heard before. "Emma, honey, I need you to sit up front today. I've got some exciting news about your film project." "I prefer the back, Mr. O'Sullivan. I can spread out my notes better there." Frank's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. "Sit by me, or don't go at all. Your choice." The words hit Emma like ice water. In 8 years of riding Frank's bus, he'd never spoken to any student with such cold authority. The other kids were already seated, chatting and laughing, oblivious to the tension crackling between driver and passenger. Emma's hands trembled as she took the front seat directly behind Frank. The familiar comfort of the school bus, the torn vinyl seats, the smell of diesel fuel, the morning chatter of classmates, suddenly felt alien and threatening. "That's my good girl," Frank murmured as he pulled away from the curb. "You know, Emma, I've been thinking about your college dreams. Film school's expensive. USC must cost what, $70,000 a year?" Emma stared straight ahead, her stomach churning. "Something like that. I know people in Hollywood, producers, directors, real industry connections." Frank adjusted his rearview mirror, his eyes finding Emma's reflection. "But those kinds of introductions, they require trust, special arrangements." The bus route took an unfamiliar turn, heading away from the direct path to school. Emma's pulse quickened. "Mr. O'Sullivan, where are we going?" "Just a little detour, sweetheart. There's someone I want you to meet. A film producer who's in town for a few days. He specifically asked to see your work." Emma's mind raced. A real producer wanting to see her documentary seemed too good to be true, but Frank had always been kind to her family, especially after her mother died. He'd given them free rides when Sam's truck broke down, had even helped Sam find work when the shop was slow. "I don't have my portfolio with me," Emma said weakly. "That's okay. This is just an introduction, a chance for you to make an impression." Frank's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "But Emma, this needs to be our secret for now. Your father wouldn't understand these kinds of opportunities. He might try to interfere." The bus pulled into a deserted area behind the old mining facility, far from the main road. Emma's throat went dry as Frank turned off the engine and swiveled in his seat to face her. "Now then," he said, his friendly mask slipping away entirely, "let's talk about what you're willing to do for your dreams." 20 minutes later, Emma stumbled into Copper Ridge High School's main office, her face pale and her hands shaking. Guidance counselor Mrs. Patterson took one look at the girl and immediately ushered her into a private room. "Emma, honey, what happened? You look terrified." The words came out in broken fragments. Frank's demands, his threats, the way he touched her shoulder and whispered about special favors that successful actresses had to perform. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew darker with each detail. "Emma, I need to call your father and the sheriff. What Frank did, what he's threatening, it's not okay, it's criminal." By noon, Sam Mitchell's world had shattered into a million pieces. Sheriff Bill Thompson sat across from him in the school conference room, his notebook filled with Emma's statement while Sam struggled to process the impossible truth. "Frank O'Sullivan has been grooming your daughter," Bill said gently. Emma's description matches classic predator behavior, building trust, isolating the victim, using financial pressure and dreams as leverage. Sam's hands clenched into fists. "I trusted him. We all trusted him. He was at Margaret's funeral, for God's sake. He brought us casseroles." That's how they operate, Sam. They embed themselves in the community, become indispensable. It's the perfect camouflage. Outside the conference room, Rose Thompson sat in her wheelchair, having insisted Bill bring her to the school. Her weathered fingers clutched a manila envelope she'd been carrying for 50 years, waiting for this moment she'd prayed would never come. The confrontation happened at sunset behind Mitchell's auto shop, where Sam had been mechanically changing oil filters while rage built in his chest like steam in an overheated radiator. Frank O'Sullivan appeared in the doorway, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by something calculating and cold. "Sam, we need to talk about this misunderstanding with Emma." Sam's wrench clattered to the concrete floor. "Misunderstanding? You threatened my daughter." "Now hold on there, friend. Emma's a bright girl, but she's got an active imagination. All I did was offer to help with her college situation." Frank stepped closer, his voice taking on a reasonable tone that made Sam's skin crawl. "You know how teenage girls can blow things out of proportion." The accusation hit Sam like a physical blow. "Don't you dare suggest my daughter is lying." "I'm not suggesting anything," Frank said smoothly. "But think about it, Sam. Your financial situation, Emma's college dreams, it's a lot of pressure on a young mind. Sometimes kids create drama to get attention, to explain why their dreams might not come true." Sam launched himself forward, but Frank sidestepped with practiced ease. "Easy there, partner. Violence won't solve anything. Besides, who's the town going to believe? A stable, respected employee like me, or a struggling single father with money problems?" The words stung because they carried an edge of truth that terrified Sam. His arrest record was clean, but everyone knew about the medical bills, the late mortgage payments, the way he sometimes had to choose between Emma's school supplies and keeping the lights on. Sheriff Bill Thompson's investigation began with methodical precision, but within 48 hours it exploded into something far more complex than a single incident of misconduct. Lisa Chen, a quiet sophomore, came forward with trembling hands and a story that mirrored Emma's experience almost exactly. "He said he knew people in the fashion industry," Lisa whispered to Bill during her interview. "Said models needed to be comfortable with their bodies, needed to show they were serious about their careers. He started with small things, asking me to adjust my seatbelt, to sit closer to the front." Maria Rodriguez followed the next day, her story adding another layer of horror. Frank had targeted her with promises of culinary school connections, using her family's illegal immigration status as additional leverage. "He said if I reported anything, he'd call immigration on my parents," Maria sobbed. "We've been here 10 years, but we don't have papers." He knew that. He knew exactly how to trap me. The pattern became sickeningly clear. Frank O'Sullivan had been systematically identifying vulnerable students and exploiting their specific dreams and fears. And the honor student who needed college scholarships, the undocumented teenager desperate to protect her family, the aspiring model from a broken home. But the investigation took an unexpected turn when Bill discovered the first red herring. School janitor Miguel Vasquez, a quiet man with a 20-year-old conviction for drug possession, became the subject of whispered suspicions around town. Parents began pulling their children aside, asking if Miguel had ever made them uncomfortable. "It's always the quiet ones," muttered Carol Henderson at the grocery store. "I never trusted him anyway." The gossip reached Miguel's ears within hours, and the 53-year-old man broke down in Bill's office, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Sheriff, I swear on my mother's grave, I never touched a child inappropriately, never even thought about it. I clean the schools because I love seeing kids learn and grow." That's all. Bill's gut told him Miguel was innocent, but the community's hunger for a scapegoat grew stronger each day. It was easier to blame the outsider, the man with a record, than to accept that their trusted bus driver, the man who'd driven their children safely for 8 years, could be a predator. Meanwhile, Rose Thompson's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She began making mysterious phone calls late at night, her voice hushed and urgent. Bill caught fragments of conversations that made no sense, references to the 1973 case and patterns that never change, and "I should have spoken up 50 years ago." "Aunt Rose, what are you talking about?" Bill pressed, after finding her poring over yellowed newspaper clippings at 2 in the morning. "Nothing, William. Just old memories troubling an old woman's sleep." But Rose's manila envelope, the one she'd clutched so tightly at the school, remained hidden in her bedroom drawer, its contents a secret she wasn't ready to share. Frank O'Sullivan's financial records revealed the first major twist that elevated the case beyond simple misconduct. Deputy Martinez discovered bank deposits totaling $47,000 over the past 18 months, money that couldn't be explained by Frank's bus driver's salary of $28,000 per year. "Where did this money come from?" Bill demanded during Frank's second interrogation. "Freelance driving jobs, weekend work, birthday parties, church events, cash payments, so I didn't always report them properly to the IRS." Frank's answers came smoothly, but his eyes never quite met Bill's. The story might have held up if Deputy Martinez hadn't found the burner phone hidden in Frank's toolbox. The call log revealed connections to numbers across 4 different states: Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and California. The pattern suggested something far more organized than a single predator operating in isolation. As the investigation expanded, Emma's trauma deepened. The confident, creative teenager who'd dreamed of USC film school began having nightmares, her artwork turning dark and disturbing, her sketchpad filled with images of yellow buses transforming into cages, of friendly faces wearing hidden monster masks. Sam watched his daughter disappear before his eyes, her spirit dimming like a candle in a storm. The college application deadlines were approaching, but Emma had stopped working on her documentary, stopped talking about her future entirely. "I'm never getting on another bus," she whispered one night, curled up on the living room couch. "I can't trust anyone anymore, Dad. If Mr. O'Sullivan could fool everyone for 8 years, how do we know who else is lying to us?" The question haunted Sam because he didn't have an answer. In a town of 3,200 people, where everyone supposedly knew everyone else, a predator had operated in plain sight for nearly a decade. The realization shattered not just Emma's innocence, but the entire community's sense of safety and trust. The investigation's scope expanded like ripples from a stone thrown into still water when Bill Thompson received a call from Detective Sarah Martinez in Flagstaff, Arizona. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much darkness in her career. "Sheriff Thompson, we got your bolo on Frank O'Sullivan. You might want to sit down for this. We had a similar case 3 years ago. Bus driver, same MO, targeting vulnerable kids with big dreams. The bastard disappeared before we could build a solid case." Bill's blood ran cold as Martinez continued. "Name was Frank Osborne then. Before that, Frank Owen in Tucson and Frank Oliver in Las Cruces, New Mexico." This son of a bitch has been working the Southwest Circuit for over a decade, changing his name just enough to slip through background checks. The manila folder that arrived via express mail the next day contained photographs, police reports, and victim statements that painted a horrifying picture. 17 girls across 4 states, all between 14 and 17, all targeted with the same calculated precision. Frank's method never varied. Identify the vulnerable, exploit their dreams, isolate them from support systems, then escalate gradually until compliance was achieved. Emma's drawings had evolved from dark sketches to detailed maps during her sleepless nights. She'd been unconsciously documenting Frank's route changes, the abandoned buildings he'd pointed out during their bus rides, the way he'd casually mentioned friends who could help ambitious young women succeed in their chosen fields. "Look at this, Dad," Emma said, spreading her notebooks across the kitchen table with trembling hands. "Remember when he started taking that detour past the old mining office? And how he always slowed down near the abandoned houses on Copper Creek Road? I thought he was just being careful, but now—" Sam studied his daughter's unconscious intelligence gathering with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Even in her trauma, Emma had been documenting potential evidence, her filmmaker's eye capturing details that could prove crucial to the case. Meanwhile, Rose Thompson's mysterious phone calls revealed their purpose when she wheeled herself into Bill's office carrying a cardboard box that looked like it had survived several decades. Her hands shook not from age or illness but from the weight of secrets finally demanding to be told. "William, I need to show you something I should have shared 50 years ago," Rose said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Frank O'Sullivan isn't the first predator I've encountered. He's not even the worst." The box contained newspaper clippings dating back to 1973, all from a small town in Colorado where Rose had lived as a young woman. The headlines told a familiar story. Local bus driver under investigation. 3 teenage girls report inappropriate conduct. Community divided over allegations. "His name was Franklin Olson then," Rose continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "I was 16, just like Emma. He used the same tactics, promises of opportunities, exploitation of financial desperation, threats about what would happen if we spoke up." Bill stared at the faded photographs, seeing an unmistakable resemblance between the young man from 1973 and the Frank O'Sullivan he'd known for 8 years. "Aunt Rose, are you saying this is the same person?" "I'm saying predators don't age the way normal people do," Rose replied cryptically. "Evil has a way of preserving itself, passing from one generation to the next, finding new hunting grounds when the old ones become too dangerous." The revelation about Rose's past transformed the investigation's emotional landscape. Sam found himself sitting in his truck outside Rose's house at midnight, both of them too wounded to sleep, sharing the terrible bond of parents who'd failed to protect their children from monsters hiding in plain sight. "I've carried this guilt for 50 years, Rose confessed, her words fogging the passenger window as desert wind howled around them. 3 girls in Colorado tried to report Franklin Olson. The town chose to protect his reputation over our safety. 2 of those girls left town and never came back. The third, Sarah Morrison, killed herself 6 months later." Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. "Rose, you were just a kid. It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? I had chances to speak up later when I saw the pattern repeating in other towns. I kept newspaper clippings, tracked cases across multiple states, but I never contacted authorities. I was too ashamed, too afraid no one would believe an old woman's suspicions." The financial investigation took a shocking turn when Deputy Martinez uncovered Frank's connections to a sophisticated network operating across the Southwest. The $47,000 in mysterious deposits represented just a fraction of a larger operation that generated an estimated $2.3 million annually through the exploitation of vulnerable teenagers. The network's structure resembled a business more than random criminal activity. Frank served as a talent scout, identifying and grooming potential victims who were then passed along to handlers in larger cities. The girls' dreams weren't just being exploited, they were being weaponized in a systematic fashion that targeted specific vulnerabilities. Emma's college aspirations made her valuable to Hollywood connections. Maria Rodriguez's culinary dreams connected her to Las Vegas restaurant networks. Lisa Chen's modeling ambitions led toward Phoenix fashion industry contacts. Each girl had been researched, profiled, and assigned to specific handlers based on their individual psychological profiles. "This isn't just some perverted bus driver," Bill explained to the FBI task force that arrived from Phoenix. "This is organized crime masquerading as mentorship. They're running a pipeline from small towns to major metropolitan areas using children's dreams as recruitment tools." Agent Rebecca Carter, a 15-year veteran of human trafficking cases, reviewed the evidence with the grim efficiency of someone who'd seen similar operations before. "Sheriff Thompson, what you've uncovered here represents one of the most sophisticated child trafficking networks we've encountered in the Southwest. These people aren't just criminals, they're predators with advanced psychological training." The community's response fractured along predictable lines as news of the expanded investigation leaked through local gossip networks. Some residents rallied around the victims, organizing support groups and demanding justice. Others, particularly those who'd trusted Frank with their own children for years, found it easier to question the girls' credibility than accept the horrifying truth about their own judgment. "Those girls are looking for attention," muttered Bob Peterson at the hardware store. "Frank O'Sullivan coached Little League for 3 years. You think a child molester would volunteer to work with kids?" The comment reached Emma through the merciless efficiency of small-town gossip, adding another layer of trauma to her already fragmented sense of safety. She stopped leaving the house except for mandatory school attendance, her dreams of USC film school seeming as distant as childhood memories. Principal Martha Hayes emerged as Emma's most vocal supporter during this dark period, offering private tutoring sessions and emotional support that gradually helped Emma begin processing her trauma. Martha's office became a sanctuary where Emma could speak freely about her experiences without fear of judgment or disbelief. "Emma, what happened to you wasn't your fault," Martha said during one of their sessions. "Predators spend years perfecting their techniques. They know exactly how to identify vulnerable targets and exploit their dreams. Your strength in speaking up probably saved other girls from experiencing the same trauma." Martha's support proved crucial when Emma received an unexpected opportunity, a scholarship interview for a summer film program at Arizona State University. The program director, Dr. James Wilson, had reviewed Emma's documentary work and wanted to discuss her potential despite the incomplete application. "This could be your chance to get back on track academically," Martha encouraged. "The program includes college credit and connections to industry professionals, real professionals, not the false promises that Predator made." But Emma's trust had been so thoroughly shattered that even legitimate opportunities felt like traps. "How do I know Dr. Wilson isn't another Frank O'Sullivan? How do I know anyone is who they claim to be?" The question highlighted the deeper damage caused by Frank's systematic manipulation. Beyond the immediate trauma of his advances, he'd destroyed Emma's ability to distinguish between genuine support and predatory grooming. Every adult's offer of help now carried the potential for exploitation. Sam struggled with similar trust issues as legal bills began mounting beyond his ability to pay. The family's financial situation, already precarious due to Margaret's medical debt, deteriorated rapidly as Emma's therapy costs and lost work time pushed them toward bankruptcy. "I can't afford to protect my own daughter," Sam confessed to Rose during one of their late-night conversations. The system that's supposed to help us is bankrupting us instead. Rose's response surprised him with its fierce determination. Samuel, money is just paper. Emma's healing is worth more than any debt. We'll find a way through this, even if I have to sell everything I own. The investigation reached a critical juncture when Frank's burner phone records revealed communications with someone using the code name Shepard, apparently a higher-level coordinator who managed multiple scouts like Frank across different territories. The messages discussed product delivery schedules and client preferences in language that made Agent Carter's blood boil. "We're not just dealing with local predators anymore," she explained to Bill. "This network has national reach, possibly international connections. Frank O'Sullivan is small potatoes compared to whoever this Shepard character represents." But as the investigation expanded beyond Copper Ridge's borders, Emma's immediate need for healing and justice remained trapped in legal procedures that seemed designed more to protect the system than help victims. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away, during which time Frank remained free on bail, his presence in town a constant reminder of Emma's vulnerability. The psychological pressure finally overwhelmed Emma during a mandatory court preparation session, where she broke down completely while reviewing her testimony. The confidence she'd once possessed, the creative spirit that had dreamed of filmmaking success, seemed lost beneath layers of trauma and fear. "I can't do this, Dad," she sobbed in Sam's arms outside the courthouse. "Everyone's going to be looking at me, judging me, wondering if I'm telling the truth. And Frank will be sitting right there, smiling at me the way he always did." Sam held his daughter while his own tears fell silently onto her auburn hair, feeling more helpless than he had even during Margaret's final days. At least cancer had been an enemy he could understand, could fight with medical procedures and hope for miraculous cures. This enemy wore friendly masks and corrupted the very institutions designed to protect children. The countdown began on a Tuesday morning when Agent Carter received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Luis Ramirez from El Paso, Texas, and his words carried the weight of immediate urgency. "Agent Carter, we've got a situation developing down here. 3 teenage girls have gone missing from our school district in the past week. All of them fit the profile from your Arizona case. Vulnerable kids with big dreams and limited family support. We think your Frank O'Sullivan might be involved in something happening right now." Carter's blood went cold as she studied the photographs Ramirez transmitted electronically. Maria Santos, 16, aspiring dancer whose single mother worked double shifts to pay rent. Jennifer Walsh, 15, gifted artist from a foster home. Crystal Martinez, 17, honor student dreaming of medical school despite her family's undocumented status. "Agent Carter," Ramirez continued, "we intercepted communications suggesting these girls are being moved north tomorrow night. If your network analysis is correct, they might be heading toward Arizona, possibly your jurisdiction." The ticking clock that had been quietly counting down in the background suddenly became deafeningly loud. 48 hours. That's how long the task force estimated they had before the 3 El Paso girls disappeared into the network's pipeline, potentially forever. Bill Thompson's phone rang at 5:47 a.m., jarring him from the first decent sleep he'd managed in weeks. Carter's voice cut through his grogginess like a blade through silk. "Sheriff, we need to move now. Frank O'Sullivan just received a text message instructing him to prepare a special transport for tomorrow night. We believe he's about to escalate his operation, possibly attempting to move Emma and the other local girls out of state before the preliminary hearing." The words hit Bill like physical blows. Emma Grace Mitchell, Lisa Chen, and Maria Rodriguez, all 3 victims who'd found the courage to speak up, might be targets for immediate abduction. The network had apparently decided that leaving witnesses alive posed too great a risk to their operation. Sam Mitchell received the call at 6:15 a.m. while preparing Emma's breakfast, eggs scrambled with government cheese because it was all they could afford. Bill's voice carried a careful calm that somehow made the terror worse than shouting would have. "Sam, we need to move Emma to protective custody immediately. The FBI has credible intelligence suggesting Frank's associates may attempt to abduct her within the next 24 hours. The spoon clattered from Sam's nerveless fingers, sending scrambled eggs across the linoleum floor. "Abduct her." "Bill, what the hell are you talking about? The trafficking network is larger than we initially suspected. Emma's not just a victim of local abuse, she's been targeted for transport to buyers in other states. We think Frank received orders to eliminate the witnesses before they can testify." Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by her father's panicked tone. She took one look at Sam's pale face and immediately understood that their nightmare was about to get worse. "Dad, what's happening?" Rose Thompson's mysterious phone calls finally revealed their true purpose when she wheeled herself into the police station at 7:30 a.m. carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than Bill himself. Her weathered hands shook as she placed it on his desk, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "William, I haven't been entirely truthful about my past. The newspaper clippings I showed you were real, but they weren't just about my own victimization 50 years ago. I've been tracking this network, or networks like it, for 5 decades. The briefcase contained documentation that stunned even Agent Carter's experienced eyes. Rose had compiled evidence from dozens of cases across multiple states and decades, creating a comprehensive map of predator networks that law enforcement had never fully recognized or connected. "Rose," Carter said slowly, "this represents more investigative work than most federal task forces accomplish in years. How did you manage to gather all this information?" "I became a victim's advocate after my own trauma," Rose replied. "But instead of working through official channels that often failed to protect children, I created an underground network of survivors. Women who'd been trafficked, parents who'd lost children, law enforcement officers who were frustrated by jurisdictional limitations. We've been sharing information and tracking patterns for decades." The briefcase contained the key to understanding Frank O'Sullivan's network structure. Rose's documentation revealed a rotating system of scouts who identified vulnerable children, shepherds who coordinated transportation, and handlers who managed the final transactions. The network operated across state lines specifically to avoid federal prosecution, moving children through jurisdictions too quickly for local law enforcement to build comprehensive cases. "The reason Frank stayed in Copper Ridge for 8 years instead of his usual 2-year rotation is right here," Rose said, pointing to a detailed timeline. "Emma wasn't his only target. She was being groomed as his replacement recruiter. They wanted her to start identifying other vulnerable students once she aged out of the victim category." The revelation hit Sam like a physical assault. Not only had Frank been planning to traffic his daughter, but he'd intended to turn Emma into a predator herself, forcing her to help victimize other children to ensure her own survival. The rescue operation began at 2:00 p.m. when Frank's phone buzzed with coordinates for the pickup location, an abandoned mining facility 12 miles outside Copper Ridge. The FBI had been monitoring his communications for 72 hours, building a comprehensive picture of the network's immediate plans. But Frank had become suspicious of the increased law enforcement attention. Instead of following his normal routine, he implemented what the network called Protocol 7, immediate extraction of high-value targets using backup transportation and alternative routes. Emma was walking to her therapy appointment at 3:15 p.m. when a white van pulled up beside her on Main Street. 2 men she'd never seen before stepped out, their movements coordinated and purposeful. "Emma Mitchell." "We're with Child Protective Services." There's been a development in your case that requires immediate attention." Something in their tone triggered every survival instinct Emma had developed since her ordeal began. Instead of approaching the van, she turned and ran toward the nearest populated building, Henderson's hardware store, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. "Somebody help me! These men are trying to take me!" Bob Henderson, the same man who'd questioned Emma's credibility weeks earlier, didn't hesitate. He stepped out of his store with a baseball bat and positioned himself between Emma and the van. "You boys need to identify yourselves properly, or you need to leave. This young lady is under police protection." The two men exchanged glances, their cover blown by Emma's quick thinking and the community's unexpected solidarity. They climbed back into the van and sped away, but not before Henderson memorized their license plate number. Bill Thompson's radio crackled with Henderson's report at 3:23 p.m., 8 minutes after the attempted abduction. The coordinated timing suggested that Frank's associates had been watching Emma's daily routine, waiting for the optimal moment to strike when she was most vulnerable. "All units, we have an attempted kidnapping in progress," Bill announced over the countywide frequency. "Suspects are in a white panel van, Arizona plates Charlie 79 Delta Mike 6, last seen heading east on Highway 87. The chase that followed stretched across 3 counties and lasted 47 minutes. The van's occupants, later identified as Marcus Webb and David Torres, both with extensive criminal records related to human trafficking, drove with the desperation of men who understood the consequences of failure in their organization. At 4:10 p.m., Webb lost control of the van while attempting to navigate a sharp curve at excessive speed. The vehicle rolled 3 times before coming to rest against a desert oak tree, its occupants critically injured but alive. The crash scene yielded evidence that transformed the investigation from a local case to a federal priority. Webb's cell phone contained contact information for buyers in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Los Angeles, along with photographs of dozens of teenage girls from across the Southwest. Torres carried $15,000 in cash and detailed instructions for delivering 3 packages to different locations. Emma and the 2 other local victims had been assigned to separate buyers in different cities. Agent Carter's face went pale as she reviewed the evidence. "Sheriff Thompson, this network is more sophisticated than anything we've seen in the region." They had detailed psychological profiles on all 3 girls, specific buyer preferences, and transport routes that would have made tracking virtually impossible. But Frank O'Sullivan had vanished during the chaos of the attempted abduction. His apartment had been cleared out, his personal vehicle abandoned in a shopping center parking lot 40 miles away. The network's Protocol 7 included extraction procedures for compromised scouts, and Frank had apparently activated his escape plan the moment his associates failed to secure their targets. The manhunt for Frank intensified as darkness fell across Copper Ridge. Roadblocks appeared on every major highway, while helicopters equipped with thermal imaging searched the desert areas where a fugitive might attempt to hide. Sam Mitchell sat in the police station's conference room with Emma, both of them struggling to process how quickly their ordeal had escalated from past trauma to immediate physical danger. The protective custody protocols meant they couldn't return home until Frank was captured, adding displacement and uncertainty to their already overwhelming situation. "Dad, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the radio chatter from ongoing search operations. "What if they never find him? What if we have to live like this forever?" Rose Thompson wheeled herself into the conference room at 8:30 p.m., her face showing the strain of a woman who'd carried too many secrets for too many years. But her voice remained steady as she addressed Emma with the hard-won wisdom of a survivor. "Emma, honey, I know this feels like the end of the world. I know you're questioning whether speaking up was the right choice. But let me tell you something I wish someone had told me 50 years ago. The monsters only win when we stop fighting them." She reached for Emma's hands, her weathered fingers surprisingly strong as they gripped the teenager's trembling ones. You saved yourself today by running and screaming for help instead of trusting those fake officials. You saved Lisa and Maria by refusing to let this network transport you to buyers. And you've probably saved dozens of other girls who would have been targeted if this operation had continued. As midnight approached, the search for Frank O'Sullivan continued across the Arizona desert. While 3 teenage girls slept safely in protective custody, their courage having disrupted a trafficking network that had operated successfully for decades. The third day of Frank O'Sullivan's disappearance brought news that shattered what remained of Copper Ridge's sense of safety. Agent Carter's phone call to Bill Thompson at 6:47 a.m. carried the weight of a death sentence. "Sheriff, we found Frank. He's dead. Apparent suicide in a motel room outside Tucson. But that's not the worst of it." Bill's stomach dropped as Carter continued, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Frank left behind a laptop with encrypted files. Our tech team cracked them 2 hours ago. Sheriff, this network isn't just about trafficking children for sexual exploitation. They've been selling kids to adoption rings, organ harvesting operations, and forced labor camps across 3 countries. The revelation hit Bill like a physical blow. The scope of evil they'd uncovered went beyond anything his small-town law enforcement experience had prepared him to handle. "How many children, Agent Carter?" "Conservative estimate. Over 300 kids in the past 5 years. Frank's files contain buyer preferences, medical records, psychological profiles, and shipping manifests that read like livestock inventories." Emma Grace Mitchell learned the truth about Frank's suicide while sitting in the hospital cafeteria with her father, mechanically eating a breakfast sandwich that tasted like cardboard. The protective custody protocols required them to remain in public spaces under FBI surveillance, turning every meal into a surreal performance of normalcy. Sam watched his daughter's face crumble as Agent Carter explained Frank's final message, a rambling confession that detailed his network's operations while blaming market demand for the trafficking of vulnerable children. "Emma, I need you to understand something," Carter said gently. "Frank's suicide wasn't an act of remorse. It was a final attempt to control the narrative. His confession is designed to make people feel sorry for him, to suggest that he was just a small part of something beyond his control." Emma's voice came out as a whisper. "But now we'll never know how many other children he hurt, will we? He took those secrets with him." The psychological impact of Frank's suicide rippled through Copper Ridge like shock waves from an earthquake. Some residents expressed relief that the monster could never hurt another child. Others felt cheated of justice, angry that Frank had escaped accountability through death. But the most devastating reaction came from the children who'd trusted him, dozens of former students who now questioned every interaction they'd ever had with their friendly bus driver. 7-year-old Tommy Martinez, who'd ridden Frank's bus for 2 years, began having nightmares about yellow vehicles chasing him through dark corridors. His mother, Rosa Martinez, found herself obsessively reviewing every conversation her son had ever mentioned having with Frank. "What if he said something to Tommy? What if he was grooming my baby too?" Rosa sobbed during an emergency parent meeting at the school. "How do I know my child is safe? How do I know anyone is safe?" The community's fracture deepened when Frank's encrypted files revealed the network's recruitment strategies. The predators had studied Copper Ridge's demographics, identifying it as an ideal hunting ground due to high poverty rates, limited law enforcement resources, and a transient population that wouldn't generate sustained missing person investigations. But the most horrifying discovery came when tech analysts uncovered Frank's succession plans, detailed instructions for identifying and training local accomplices who could continue the network's operations after his departure. The files contained psychological profiles of potential recruits, including school employees, community leaders, and even law enforcement personnel who might be vulnerable to corruption. Principal Martha Hayes found her name prominently featured in Frank's recruitment files when Agent Carter requested a private meeting at the school on Thursday afternoon. The documentation painted Martha as the perfect inside accomplice, financially struggling due to her divorce, professionally ambitious but overlooked for promotions, and psychologically isolated due to her daughter's recent suicide. Ms. Hayes, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your interactions with Frank O'Sullivan, Carter began, her tone carefully neutral despite the damning evidence spread across the conference table. Martha's face went pale as she reviewed Frank's detailed notes about her vulnerabilities, her financial situation, her daughter's death, and her desperate desire to help students succeed despite limited resources. Agent Carter, I swear to you on my daughter's grave, I never helped Frank hurt any child. Yes, we had conversations about students who were struggling, but I thought I was helping identify kids who needed extra support. But Frank's files told a different story. They documented how Martha had unknowingly provided him with confidential information about students' family situations, financial struggles, and personal dreams. Her innocent desire to help vulnerable children had been weaponized by a predator who understood exactly how to manipulate well-meaning adults. The revelation about Martha's unwitting complicity destroyed Emma's last sanctuary of trust. The principal who'd supported her through the worst trauma of her life, who'd offered comfort and encouragement when everyone else seemed to doubt her story, had been compromised by the same predator who'd targeted Emma herself. "I can't do this anymore, Dad," Emma said, her voice hollow with exhaustion as they sat in their temporary hotel room. "Everyone I trusted was either working with Frank or being used by him. Martha, the guidance counselor, even some of the other teachers, they all gave him information about me without knowing it." Sam held his daughter while she sobbed, feeling helpless against an enemy that had tentacles reaching into every aspect of their community. The financial cost of their displacement was destroying what remained of their stability. Hotel bills, restaurant meals, missed work days, and therapy sessions that insurance wouldn't cover. "Emma, we're going to get through this," Sam whispered, though his own faith was cracking under the weight of their circumstances. "We have to believe that truth and justice will win eventually." But justice felt increasingly abstract when legal procedures moved at a glacial pace, while their real-world problems mounted daily. Emma's therapy sessions revealed the depth of her psychological damage, not just from Frank's abuse, but from the systematic destruction of her ability to trust any adult authority figure. Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's trauma specialist, explained the concept to Sam during a family session that left both father and daughter emotionally drained. "Emma has experienced what we call institutional betrayal," Dr. Chen said. "It's not enough that Frank violated her trust. The entire system she depended on for safety was compromised. The school that was supposed to protect her provided Frank with information about her vulnerabilities. The community that should have supported her initially questioned her credibility. Even the investigation that vindicated her has uprooted her entire life." The psychological assessment painted a grim picture of Emma's recovery prospects. The confident, creative teenager who'd once dreamed of USC film school now exhibited symptoms consistent with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Her artistic abilities, once a source of joy and hope, had been corrupted by trauma. Her sketches now filled with images of cages, masks, and predatory figures wearing friendly faces. Rose Thompson's health deteriorated rapidly as the stress of the investigation combined with her advancing cancer. The 75-year-old woman who'd carried the weight of secrets for 5 decades was finally free to speak her truth, but the effort had depleted her remaining reserves of strength. "William," she whispered to Bill during one of his daily hospital visits, "I need to tell you about Sarah Morrison, the girl who killed herself after the 1973 case in Colorado." Bill leaned closer as Rose's voice grew weaker. "Sarah left a letter before she died. She said she couldn't live knowing that other girls would suffer because the adults chose to protect the system instead of protecting children. She made me promise that if I ever got another chance to stop a predator, I wouldn't let fear keep me silent. The weight of Rose's 50-year burden finally broke her spirit completely. I kept that promise by coming to Copper Ridge, by tracking Frank's network, by documenting everything I could find. But Sarah's still dead, William. All those other children over the decades are still damaged. Emma and Lisa and Maria are still traumatized. Sometimes I wonder if speaking up just spreads the pain around instead of stopping it. The community's response to the expanding investigation grew increasingly polarized as residents struggled to process the magnitude of what had been happening in their midst. Some families packed up and left Copper Ridge entirely, unable to cope with the knowledge that their safe small town had been systematically infiltrated by predators. Others doubled down on denial, insisting that the federal investigation was overblown, that Frank had been a lone wolf rather than part of an organized network. These residents blamed the victims for destroying the town's reputation and called for an end to the investigation that was hurting innocent people. The school district faced potential closure as enrollment plummeted and funding dried up. Parents who couldn't afford to relocate began homeschooling their children rather than trust any institutional authority with their safety. Sam Mitchell watched his daughter's future evaporate along with their community's stability, knowing that Emma's dreams of college and career success seemed increasingly impossible given their circumstances. The trafficking network had been disrupted, but the collateral damage to innocent lives continued to spread like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Rose Thompson's final gambit began on a gray November morning when she summoned Agent Carter to her hospital room with hands that trembled from more than just morphine. The cancer had spread to her bones, but her mind remained sharp as desert thorns, focused on a truth she'd carried for 50 years. "Agent Carter, there's something I haven't told you about Frank O'Sullivan," Rose whispered, her voice barely audible above the beeping machines. "Something I discovered 3 days before he killed himself." Carter leaned closer, instinctively knowing that Rose's revelation would change everything they thought they understood about the case. Frank wasn't the network's leader. He was barely middle management. The real power, the person they call Shepherd. I know who it is. I've known for 2 months. Rose's weathered fingers fumbled with a manila envelope hidden beneath her hospital blanket. Inside were photographs, financial records, and handwritten notes that painted a picture so shocking that Carter felt the room spin around her. "Agent Carter, the Shepherd isn't some shadowy criminal mastermind. It's Principal Martha Hayes." The accusation hit Carter like a physical blow. Martha Hayes, the woman who'd comforted Emma, who'd provided support during the investigation, who'd appeared to be the victim's strongest advocate, was allegedly the architect of the entire trafficking network. "Rose, that's impossible. Martha's been helping Emma through her trauma. She's been cooperating fully with our investigation." "That's exactly what makes her so dangerous," Rose replied, her voice gaining strength as she revealed the truth she'd been investigating in secret. Martha didn't stumble into Frank's recruitment files by accident. She created them. Frank was her employee, not her supervisor. The evidence Rose had gathered was damning and methodical. Bank records showing Martha's receipt of over $200,000 in the past 2 years through carefully laundered transactions. Travel records placing her in cities across the Southwest during periods when children had gone missing. Most damning of all, Martha's own handwritten notes detailing how to identify vulnerable students and exploit their specific psychological needs. But Rose, why would Martha risk everything to traffic children? She's a respected educator, a pillar of the community. Rose's laugh came out as a bitter wheeze. "Agent Carter, Martha's daughter didn't commit suicide 2 years ago. She was murdered by buyers who were unsatisfied with their purchase. Martha's been running this network as revenge against a world that failed to protect her child and as a way to fund her own investigation into her daughter's killers. The revelation recontextualized everything the FBI thought they understood about the case. Martha hadn't been protecting Emma out of compassion. She'd been managing a valuable asset while maintaining her cover as a caring educator. Her support for the investigation wasn't cooperation. It was damage control, ensuring that Frank took the blame while the real network remained intact. Martha's psychological profile is textbook, Rose continued, pulling out pages of handwritten analysis. She's a grieving mother who lost her moral compass when the system failed her child. She convinced herself that trafficking other children was justified if it helped her find justice for her daughter's death. Agent Carter's hands shook as she reviewed Rose's evidence, understanding that they'd been manipulated by a master psychological manipulator who understood exactly how to present herself as an ally while orchestrating their victimization. The confrontation with Martha Hayes took place in the same conference room where she'd comforted Emma weeks earlier, but this time Martha sat across from Agent Carter and Sheriff Thompson with the cold calculation of a cornered predator. Ms. Hayes, we have evidence suggesting your involvement in the trafficking network goes far beyond the unwitting assistance we initially discovered. Carter began, spreading Rose's documentation across the table. Martha's mask slipped for just a moment, a flicker of rage and calculation that revealed the sociopathic personality lurking beneath her caring educator facade. Agent Carter, I think you're confusing cause and effect, Martha replied, her voice maintaining the same supportive tone she'd used with Emma. Yes, I've been investigating the network that killed my daughter. Yes, I've had to make morally questionable choices to gain their trust. But everything I did was to protect other children from suffering the same fate. But Rose's evidence told a different story. Martha's investigation into her daughter's death had evolved into active participation in the trafficking network, with Martha rationalizing each escalation as necessary for her larger mission of revenge. Miss Hayes, these financial records show you've received over $200,000 from known trafficking operations, Thompson said, his voice tight with barely controlled disgust. How do you explain payments for consulting services from organizations that buy and sell children? Martha's composure finally cracked, revealing the broken woman beneath the professional exterior. You have no idea what it's like to lose a child to monsters, Sheriff. To know that somewhere out there the people who killed your baby are living comfortable lives while you're supposed to just accept it and move on. The confession that followed painted Martha as a victim who'd become a victimizer, a grieving mother whose quest for justice had transformed her into the very evil she'd originally sought to combat. I started by trying to infiltrate their network to identify my daughter's killers, Martha continued, tears streaming down her face, but the only way to gain their trust was to provide value, vulnerable children who met their buyers' specifications. I told myself I was saving these kids from worse fates, that I was protecting them by ensuring they went to better buyers. The rationalization chilled Carter to her core. Martha had convinced herself that trafficking children to less violent buyers was somehow merciful, that she was minimizing harm rather than perpetuating it. Emma Grace Mitchell was supposed to be different, Martha said, her voice breaking completely. She reminded me so much of my daughter, creative, intelligent, full of dreams. I was going to help her escape the network after she'd served her purpose as bait to draw out bigger players. But Emma's courage in speaking up had disrupted Martha's careful plans, forcing her to improvise while maintaining her cover as the supportive principal. The most horrifying revelation came when Martha revealed the network's true scope. Frank O'Sullivan had been just one of 17 scouts operating across the Southwest, all coordinated by Martha's Central Command Center, disguised as educational consulting business. The network generates approximately $4.8 million annually, Martha said with chilling clinical precision. We've processed over 400 children in the past 3 years with a 94% customer satisfaction rate. The operation was designed to be sustainable, profitable, and virtually undetectable by traditional law enforcement methods. Agent Carter struggled to maintain her professional composure as Martha described the trafficking of children with the same tone she might use to discuss curriculum planning. Ms. Hayes, did you ever consider that you'd become exactly the type of monster who killed your daughter? The question finally broke through Martha's psychological defenses, reducing her to sobbing collapse as the full weight of her crimes crashed down upon her. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "I just wanted justice for my baby. I just wanted the people who hurt her to pay for what they did." But justice had twisted into vengeance, and vengeance had metastasized into systematic evil that had destroyed hundreds of innocent lives. The arrest of Martha Hayes sent shockwaves through Copper Ridge that made Frank O'Sullivan's exposure seem minor by comparison. Parents who'd trusted their children to Martha's care for years struggled to accept that their respected principal had been orchestrating their victimization. Emma Grace. Mitchell's reaction to Martha's betrayal represented the final destruction of her ability to trust any adult authority figure. The woman who'd comforted her through her darkest moments, who'd promised her safety and justice, had been the architect of her victimization all along. "Dad, I can't do this anymore," Emma sobbed in Sam's arms as they processed the magnitude of Martha's deception. "She held my hand while I cried about what Frank did to me. She promised me justice while she was planning to sell me to buyers. How do I ever trust anyone again?" The question haunted Sam because he had no answer that didn't sound hollow in the face of such systematic betrayal. The institutions designed to protect children, schools, law enforcement, social services, had all been compromised by predators who understood exactly how to exploit public trust. Rose Thompson died 3 days after Martha's arrest. Her final mission accomplished, but her spirit broken by the weight of truths she'd carried too long in silence. Her last words to Bill were a warning that would echo long after her funeral. "William, Martha Hayes wasn't unique. There are others like her in positions of authority across the country. Broken people who've convinced themselves that evil acts can serve good purposes. The network will adapt and survive, finding new leaders and new hunting grounds." Rose's death marked the end of one chapter in the investigation, but the beginning of a much larger federal operation that would eventually uncover trafficking networks in 37 states, all connected by the same psychological profile Martha had embodied: damaged adults who rationalized harming children as necessary sacrifices for their personal crusades. The ironic reversal that defined the case wasn't just that trusted adults had betrayed the children in their care, it was that the victim's courage in speaking truth to power had exposed a level of institutional corruption that would reshape how law enforcement approached child protection nationwide. Emma Grace Mitchell's testimony, initially dismissed by some as teenage drama-seeking, had ultimately triggered the largest child trafficking investigation in FBI history, leading to 847 arrests and the rescue of over 1,200 children from various forms of exploitation. But for Emma herself, the victory felt hollow as she struggled with complex post-traumatic stress disorder that made normal life seem impossible, while her father faced bankruptcy from legal costs and lost wages that had destroyed their financial stability completely. 6 months after Martha Hayes' arrest, Emma Grace Mitchell sat at her kitchen table on Thanksgiving morning, watching her father attempt to make pancakes from a box mix they'd bought with food stamps. The familiar ritual felt surreal after everything they'd survived, but Sam insisted on maintaining some normalcy despite their transformed circumstances. "You know what I'm grateful for this year?" Sam said, flipping a slightly lopsided pancake while morning sunlight streamed through windows they could finally leave uncovered. I'm grateful that my daughter is the strongest person I know. Emma managed a small smile, the first genuine expression of happiness she'd felt in months. The nightmares still came regularly, and crowds of people still triggered panic attacks, but Dr. Chen's therapy sessions were slowly helping her rebuild her sense of safety in the world. I'm grateful for Rose, Emma replied, touching the framed photograph of the elderly woman who'd saved her life through 50 years of patient detective work. She taught me that surviving isn't enough. You have to turn your pain into purpose. The kitchen door opened with a familiar creak as Sheriff Bill Thompson stepped inside, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the closest thing to a smile Emma had seen from him since the investigation began. "Morning, you two. I've got some news that might brighten your Thanksgiving." Bill spread the contents of the envelope across their table. Official documents from the state of Arizona, the FBI Victims Compensation Fund, and Arizona State University. Emma's hands trembled as she read the papers, hardly daring to believe what they contained. "Emma, the state legislature passed the Rose Thompson Act last month," Bill explained, his voice thick with emotion. "It establishes a comprehensive support system for trafficking victims, including full educational scholarships, mental health services, and housing assistance. You've been selected as the program's first recipient." The scholarship would cover not just community college, but a full 4-year degree at Arizona State University's prestigious film program, with additional funding for graduate school if Emma chose to pursue it. More importantly, the program included ongoing trauma counseling, job placement assistance, and a support network of other survivors who could understand her experience. "There's more," Bill continued, pulling out additional documents. "The FBI investigation led to the recovery of $12.7 million in trafficker assets. After legal fees and administrative costs, the remaining funds are being distributed to victims and their families." "Emma, your family's share is $47,000, enough to pay off your medical debts and give you a fresh start." Sam's knees buckled, forcing him to sit down heavily in his chair as he processed the magnitude of their changing fortunes. After months of financial devastation, of choosing between electricity and groceries, of watching his daughter's dreams slip away because they couldn't afford hope, suddenly the future looked possible again. But Emma's reaction surprised both men. Instead of celebration, she looked thoughtful, even troubled. "Sheriff Thompson, what about the other victims? Lisa Chen's family lost their restaurant because of the legal costs. Maria Rodriguez's parents were deported because of the attention from the case. How is money supposed to fix what happened to all of us?" Her question reflected the wisdom she'd gained through trauma, the understanding that some injuries couldn't be healed with financial compensation, that justice was more complex than punishment and restitution. Bill's answer came from his own journey through the investigation. "Emma, you're right that money can't undo the damage, but it can provide tools for rebuilding. Lisa Chen just got accepted to culinary school in Phoenix, fully funded by the Victims Compensation Program. Maria Rodriguez is working with immigration attorneys funded by the same program to bring her parents back legally." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door that made Emma's pulse quicken. Unexpected visitors still triggered her fight-or-flight response, a reminder that healing wasn't linear or complete. But the visitor was Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's therapist, carrying a box wrapped in simple brown paper. "I'm sorry to interrupt your family time," Dr. Chen said, "but I wanted to deliver this personally. It's from other survivors in our support network." The box contained letters, artwork, and small gifts from dozens of trafficking survivors across the country. Young women who'd found Emma's story through news coverage and felt compelled to reach out with their own messages of hope and solidarity. "Dear Emma," one letter began, written in careful handwriting by someone who signed herself as Sarah M. Survivor, Colorado, 1973. Your courage in speaking up saved my niece from a similar fate 40 years after I stayed silent. Thank you for being the voice I was too afraid to be. Another letter came from a woman in Texas. Emma, I was trafficked at 16 and didn't find my way to freedom until I was 23. Seeing a girl your age stand up to these monsters gives me hope for my own daughter's future. You're a hero whether you feel like one or not. The most meaningful gift was a small silver necklace with a compass pendant, accompanied by a note from the Rose Thompson Foundation, an organization that had formed spontaneously after Rose's death to continue her work of tracking and exposing trafficking networks. Emma, the note read, Rose always said that survivors need to become lighthouses for other people lost in dark waters. This compass is to remind you that even when you feel lost, you're helping others find their way to safety. Emma fastened the necklace around her neck with hands that no longer shook, feeling the weight of responsibility and purpose that Rose had tried to prepare her for. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor when a rental car pulled up outside the Mitchell house and a middle-aged woman stepped out, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd survived her own traumas. "Are you Emma Grace Mitchell?" the woman asked when Sam answered the door. "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I was trafficked by Martha Hayes's network 3 years ago in New Mexico. I wanted to thank you in person." Jennifer's story emerged over coffee and leftover pancakes. How she'd been targeted at 17 through her dreams of becoming a teacher, how Martha's network had sold her to buyers in Las Vegas, how she'd escaped after 2 years of captivity and spent another year building the case that led to her trafficker's arrest. "Emma, when I heard about your courage in speaking up despite the community pressure to stay quiet, it inspired me to start testifying in other cases. Your voice gave me permission to find mine again." But Jennifer brought more than just gratitude. She carried a business proposal that would transform Emma's future in ways the teenager had never imagined. "I'm starting a nonprofit organization called Lighthouse Productions," Jennifer explained. "We create documentary films about trafficking survivors. But instead of exploiting their stories, we train survivors to tell their own stories with dignity and power. Emma, we want you to be our first student filmmaker." The opportunity would allow Emma to pursue her passion for filmmaking while processing her trauma in a constructive way, creating content that could prevent other children from experiencing similar victimization. "We're not asking you to relive your trauma for entertainment," Jennifer clarified. "We're asking you to use your artistic gifts to shine light into dark places where predators hide." Emma's answer came without hesitation. "When do we start?" As evening fell on Thanksgiving Day, the Mitchell family found themselves surrounded by an unexpected extended family of survivors, advocates, and law enforcement officers who'd become personally invested in their healing journey. Bill Thompson raised his coffee cup in a toast that captured the complex emotions of their shared experience. "To Rose Thompson, who taught us that silence protects predators while truth protects children. To Emma Grace Mitchell, who found her voice when it mattered most. And to all the survivors who are transforming their pain into purpose." Emma's response reflected the wisdom she'd gained through trauma and recovery. "I used to think courage meant not being afraid. Now I know courage means being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. I'm still scared every day, but I'm not silent anymore." The final scene unfolded as Sam tucked Emma into bed, a ritual they'd maintained despite her age, because comfort routines help manage her PTSD symptoms. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Emma asked, her voice small in the darkness. Sam's answer came from the depths of his heart. "Sweetheart, your mother always said that we're not measured by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens to us. She would be incredibly proud of the woman you're becoming. Through her bedroom window, Emma could see the lights of Copper Ridge twinkling in the desert darkness. The town was slowly healing, implementing new child protection protocols and rebuilding the trust that Martha Hayes's network had shattered. But Emma's vision extended beyond the familiar boundaries of her small town. Somewhere out there, other children were trapped in networks like the one she'd escaped. Other families were struggling with secrets and shame that needed to be brought into the light. Her final thought before sleep was a promise that Rose Thompson would have recognized. Tomorrow she would begin work on her first documentary film, turning her story of survival into a beacon for other victims who were still finding their way home. The compass pendant rested against her heart, pointing toward a future where truth, love, and human connection could triumph over even the darkest forms of evil. Not through the absence of pain, but through the transformation of pain into purpose, one story at a time. My dear friends, as we reach the golden years of our lives, we often reflect on the legacy we'll leave behind and the world we're handing to our grandchildren. Emma Grace Mitchell's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when trust feels shattered and evil seems to prevail, the human spirit can triumph through love, courage, and unwavering family bonds. Like Rose Thompson, who carried secrets for 50 years before finding the strength to protect another child, we all have moments when we must choose between comfortable silence and uncomfortable truth. This Thanksgiving story isn't just about surviving tragedy. It's about discovering that our greatest pain can become our most powerful purpose. Emma's journey from victim to advocate, Sam's transformation from helpless father to fierce protector, and their community's evolution from denial to action shows us that it's never too late to speak up, stand up, and make a difference. As grandparents, parents, and community elders, we have the wisdom and responsibility to be the lighthouse that guides younger generations safely home. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our families isn't our silence to keep peace, but our voice to ensure their safety. Discussion questions. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and speaking an uncomfortable truth to protect someone you love? What advice would you give to a grandchild who came to you with a secret that made them uncomfortable? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your wisdom and experience could help another family navigate their own difficult situation.